it's interesting because we've had some staff that have come and worked in the office, the admin people, and they never went to the club. And if you don't do that, if it isn't important to you to go down and see the people who are playing and hear songs, then you'll never last because it's just a lot of work otherwise. But if that matters to you, that's when you get that realization. When I am down there selling T-shirts, for example, which they don't like to let me do too often because I'm good with the machines. And to hear people say as they walk out the door, oh my gosh, I've never heard music in this way before. This was a life-changing experience. That's when you get that sense of, I have a responsibility here to everybody involved because it means that much to them. And when I hear the writers, kick off their shows and say, this is my favorite place to play. It is the place I always want to be. It's the place I want to try out new material. That's part of that responsibility too, is making sure that all of that is taken care of.
Yeah, brilliant. I'd like to talk a bit about the expansion of we'll call it the brand. Over the past couple of years, you've been coming to London, and then was this the first year you did Berlin and Amsterdam?
Yes.
This year?
Mm-hmm.
What prompted what made you want to do that?
We have a lot of international visitors who make their way to the Bluebird. So when I got the opportunity to bring our shows, it was first to C2C. I guess it's been 5 years in London.
Yeah.
And we didn't know how it would work, whether it would be something that people would respond to or even know about the Bluebird. I think certainly it was elevated by the television show Nashville, across the boards, of course.
Yeah.
But the audience in London that we found was remarkable. I mean, I'll take songwriters many places. And of course, I would say probably within the last 10 years, people around the world have gotten more educated on that experience and more attuned to what songwriters do and who they are. But to see an audience like we saw in London, just as quiet, I don't have to shush up for them. Not at all. I didn't even have to tell them that I was going to. They were just in it all the way. And that's what I've always found about the audiences there. And it proved to be the same in Amsterdam and Berlin, is that people were hungry for that experience and knew the Bluebird and I guess knew kind of what to expect because they loved it. And just found that the audience was great, and certainly our writers just love to have that opportunity to take their music a little bit further out. But I would also answer your question in terms of the brand of the Bluebird. I feel like our room is important as the core for who we are and what we do. And really, if there are songwriter shows across the world now, the Bluebird had a hand in making that a thing.
Yeah.
And so I want to preserve that. People are always saying, why don't you make it bigger? Why don't you, franchise? Why don't you do this? It would change everything. You can't make it bigger. Maybe a couple more bathrooms. That would be my dream. But the experience in that room matters. And so how to expand that experience is really the question. So finding partners that understand who we are and being able to export those shows in a way that really still speaks to what we do makes a way that we can kind of expand and people see it without having to expand like the core of who we are, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you feel like from the shows that you've kind of brought the essence of the Bluebirds over to the other countries? Do you feel like you've achieved that?
I mean, it would
as
be...
much as can be.
Yeah, it would be great if we could do it in the round. That would be the thing I would love for people. And you probably know that we, at one point, had partnered with the Grand Ole Opry on their building in New York City.
Yeah.
And that didn't it didn't make it, but the very last show that we did there before they shuttered, and none of us knew they were going to close, we tried an In the Round show in the room that they had set aside for the Bluebird, and it was awesome. And it was with our Fab Four, and we call them the Fab Four, but two of them, plus Tony Arata and Jelly Roll Johnson, were the architects of that In the Round in the middle of the room.
Yeah. Fred
Knobloch and Tom Schuyler. And so it was really fun to have that and to let people see kind of the germ of where it all came from.
I'm still gutted that Tony Arata didn't get to play in London. I know.
Him too. Bless his heart. He didn't even set foot outside of Heathrow. They flew from Berlin. And actually, that was one of my worries, was I felt we were okay, because they said, well, not the UK. Of course, you never know if they're going to change their mind. But I felt like, okay. But Tony and his wife were leaving Berlin that Wednesday morning. And I caught him at the airport. And I'm like, don't leave Heathrow. We're leaving.
Oh,
but
no.
I didn't know whether they might stop them if they had gotten off the flight, having been in Berlin and even stepped out into London. I thought that, there could be a problem. And I just didn't want to take a chance on them getting stranded over there.
Yeah. So we've got to talk about the Nashville TV show. I just can't not do it. Talk to me about what the program and the popularity of the show did for the venue. Did it get stupid very quickly, or
it got crazy pretty quickly, to tell you the truth. And when you get to see the documentary, you'll see some of how that kind of went down. Because it was our friend Mary Gaucher, wonderful songwriter, performer. She was from Boston, and she saw what happened with Cheers, that television show that had a bar, Cheers, in it. And she's like, you don't know what's going to hit you. And I'm like, yeah, okay. But man, she was right. She was right. Because the Bluebird was such a big part of the television show, I have to say that Callie Corey, who developed the show, it was super important to her to have the Bluebird involved in the show, and to really show what Nashville is through the Bluebird. And what we what we do is what many venues do with songwriters, is that they're the focus. And so in order to talk about songwriters, she felt like the Bluebird was the key point. So that being said, the Bluebird was really a cast member.
Yeah.
To the extent that, I got to be on the show and play myself all the time. And some of my other staff were in the show too. And other people in the city were in the show. So all of us would watch it and be like, oh my gosh, there's Steve Fisher. So it became really a thing that was an anchor. And I sort of say that as a preface to what happened to us, because I think if we had just been like a fake location, it wouldn't have happened. But we were a real place that really mattered, that they created an exact replica of. And that importance and that cast member status made everybody want to come, because the Bluebird became a celebrity. Just like Claire, any of the people in the show. So we would have, at the time, we did our open mics, we would draw names out of a hat and have a first come, first serve entry. And if you got your name drawn out as one of the first 25, you got to play. Some of the early on Mondays after the television show broadcast, there were 300 people, 400 people in that room. We can fit 90. And of an open mic, for example, we have 25 players and they each get to bring one guest. So 50 seats were gone. So there's this mass of people, and they'd be like fanning out into the highway in front of us, and you couldn't talk to them because nobody wanted to lose their place in line. It was like Lord of the Flies and unmanageable. And we got a lot of criticism for not managing the crowd well. But it was like, first, we didn't expect it. Second, so it took us a little while to get our sea legs in that. But second, people were like rabid. people would cry, people would scream, people would call on the phone and beg. And, they had their mother was coming into town. It was crazy and kind of exhausting. And we had staff meeting every week and be like, okay, what do we do? How do we handle these people? And that when an individual approaches you, you can easily love them. When 300 people come running at you, it's very hard to feel good about that.
Yeah.
And so we loved the people we would talk to, and there'd be just lovely people that you'd want to help. And then there'd be people that were very antagonistic because they thought that they were entitled to a place for whatever reason. And we ended up having to have security and put people into corrals. That's how it was crazy. And as I explained earlier, we want people to have this experience. Our door people, and bless their hearts, they're the first line of attack. Yeah. So they got berated by people and screamed at by people and called names by people in the beginning. And they want to help people. If somebody's nice to us, we'll do anything for you. But it got crazy. And people have asked me, they're like, would you do it again? Because when I talked to Steve Buchanan and he offered this opportunity, I was like, well, sure, that's a commercial on national TV one week. We can use that. Oh boy.
You asked for it.
Yeah, right. It's a good idea. But I think I would always say yes. For one, it helped us make our budget. And because a quarter of our budget is made up with merchandise sales. So we have a tiny space, and a quarter of our budget we sell from that tiny space. It's amazing.
Wow.
It saved us, because we wouldn't have made our budget annually or just barely broken even if we didn't have that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Blessing in disguise.
What happened?
So, when the Bluebirds open, normally, and all's running well, do you have a day-to-day that you work to, or does it change all the time? Can of worms of a question, I know.
Yeah. I think we all start out with a day-to-day plan. But as I tell people, my job, my admin staff and I get in at 9:00 in the morning. And so our office hours finish around 5 or 5:30 on a good day. And then the club is open. And sometimes then our work transfers to the club. And all of the things, whether it's our event manager or the woman who does our social media or answers the phone and bookkeeper, all of that happens in the office. Yeah. But if something happens at the club, say the water heater broke, which is exactly what happened 3 days before we closed for the COVID when I was in Europe, the water heater blew up and we had to close. There was no way we cannot sanitize all that. And all hands on deck had to go and help make that happen, figure that out. Because that's what, it's like the doors need to open if they can every night. And so if something happens, if a server is sick or, whatever it is, all attention shifts to taking care of the club itself. And like I say, we have a great team of people, our manager, our kitchen manager, who operate that on a daily basis. But it's an old building. It's really tricky. It leaks. It has, the toilet has issues. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong. And when that does, that really interjects into a day and changes everything at the drop of a hat.
Adds to the charm.
Well, I guess so. Depends on who you are. If you're the happy person that gets into the bathroom after somebody's fixed the toilet, then yes. You're the person with your hand down the toilet. Not so much.
So, one that you may have to think about, do you have one moment that you've witnessed in your time running the Bluebird where you thought, I'm going to remember that for the rest of my life, or something you think will go down perhaps in the country history books?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I can't say there's one because I think attached. Okay, so